Well, we're back with you, and we have a few components on this table to demonstrate the basic concept of starter motor circuitry. First and foremost, of course, the most basic and obvious would be the starter's battery power source. But between the starter and the battery, of course, the ignition switch. Everybody knows that. And with an ignition switch, a key. Put the key in the tumblers, turn the key, and now we start the engine. Electrical circuit between the battery and the starter is completed by the ignition switch. But what about that key? Has it changed any in the last few years? Most certainly has. Today you might see a key with something like a resistor pellet in it. One of 15 different values, GM's passkey 1 and passkey 2, use this resistor pellet to be read by a set of contacts in the ignition switch. And when the ignition switch was turned on, the contacts were read for the correct resistance value, and now the passkey module either says go or no go to a relay, which would then signal the starter to be able to work. So we had a passkey system, vehicle theft deterrent as it's often called, in series between the ignition switch and the starter solenoid. Also, some brands of vehicles, Ford for example, with their PAT system, has a transponder, a little more high-tech version of the passkey. Instead of a resistor pellet in the actual key itself, in the base of the key, in the back, there is a little Ford emblem, but underneath that is a transponder. The transponder, when it is exposed to a magnetic field, electromagnetic field, from a coil surrounding the lock cylinder, the transponder is excited and begins to produce a signal. The signal from the transponder is then read by the PATS module, which then can either signal a go or no go, depending on if you have the right key or not, to the circuitry that's going to, among other things, allow the starter motor to crank. Now, besides special keys for vehicle theft deterrent systems, we also, for years and years, between the ignition switch and the starter solenoid, we've had a neutral safety switch or a clutch switch. This is the Ford neutral safety switch. Now, this switch, when the transmission is in park or neutral, will allow current from the ignition switch to travel to the switch terminal on the solenoid. Well, some starter circuits may use a relay that's between the ignition switch and the starter solenoid. Now, the relay could be triggered simply off the ignition switch, and the relay would then send current, a larger amount of current, to the switch terminal on the solenoid. But the relay could also be triggered by the passkey or PAT system, like we talked about just a second ago, or the PCM or ECM could trigger the relay. Now, you may be asking, why would the PCM or ECM trigger the relay? Well, on some vehicles, for example, late model General Motors, the PCM is in charge of inhibiting the starter circuit in case the engine is already running. Now, why would the PCM inhibit the engagement of the starter? Well, if the engine was already running, you'd have a gear speed on the flywheel greater than the gear speed on the starter drive. Two dissimilar speeds, two gears trying to engage, you get the picture. A horrendous clashing noise and damage to the Bendex on the starter and to the flywheel. So we stop that from happening, so now it makes the car a lot more foolproof for the driver who forgets their engine's already running and goes to engage the starter. Now, let's take our tools and go to the vehicle and diagnose some starter circuit problems for real.